Most men think power is intensity. It isn't. It's stability under pressure. This is without permission. There is a lie most men believe, and it starts early. That if you speak louder, if you take up more air, if you dominate the room with words, you are more powerful, you are respected, you are in control. But that's not how rooms actually work. Rooms don't respond to volume, they respond to nervous systems. And the nervous systems that regulate fastest sets the hierarchy, not the one that escalates. We've been socialized to confuse intensity with authority. But intensity without control is volatile, and volatility is not power. It's instability that looks dramatic. Let's be honest. You've seen it. The man who talks over everyone, the man who turns disagreement into confrontation, the man who raises his voice slightly higher each time someone challenges him. He feels dominant, but something in you knows that energy isn't stable. Because if it were stable, it wouldn't need reinforcement. Volume is often a substitute for regulation. And when a man hasn't learned regulation, volume becomes his tool. Not because he's evil, not because he's weak, because he never learned another way. Some men weren't taught how to slow their breathing, how to sit in discomfort, how to feel activation rise and stay grounded. So when tension enters the room, their only strategy is escalation. And escalation feels powerful, but it's not. It's reactive. Power isn't reaction, power is choice. And choice only exists when your nervous system isn't hijacked. Most rooms operate on something unspoken. The person who remains steady while others escalate quietly becomes the anchor. You can feel it the moment someone slows down, the moment someone speaks lower instead of louder, the moment someone refuses to perform dominance. It changes the temperature. That's not charisma, that's regulation. And masculine culture rarely teaches that. We teach projection, we teach intimidation, we teach control over others. But we almost never teach control of self. And self control isn't repression, it's sovereignty. It's the decision that no external chaos gets to dictate your internal state. That's power, not noise. And here's the uncomfortable truth: loud men are not always trying to dominate you. Often they are trying to dominate their own activation. Because when you don't know how to regulate, you reach outward. When you don't know how to steady yourself, you try to steady the room with force. But force only amplifies instability. Steadiness absorbs it. And every man in that room knows, even if he can't articulate it, which energy feels safer. This episode isn't about shaming loud men. It's about exposing the myth that loud equals strong, because it doesn't. Strength is discipline. Strength is breathing through the heat in your chest. Strength is pausing before you speak. Strength is lowering your voice when someone else raises theirs. Strength is standing in discomfort without needing to perform dominance. And most men were never taught that. Most men believe hierarchy is decided by dominance displays. It isn't. Hierarchy is decided by nervous systems. And this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable because we've made masculinity about optics, posture, voice, presence, physicality, command. But underneath all that, there's biology. When tension rises in a room, everyone's nervous system activates. Heart rate shift, breathing shortens, muscles tighten, eyes sharpen. You don't choose that. Your body does. But what you do next, that's where hierarchy forms. The man who escalates outsources his regulation. He needs the room to respond to him. He needs validation of his dominance. He needs reinforcement because internally he's destabilized. The man who regulates does the opposite. He slows breathing first. He widens perception. He reduces tone. He pauses before language. And something subtle happens. The room feels it. You don't consciously think he's powerful. You think he's steady. And steadiness feels safe. Humans are wired to orient towards safety, not volume, not threat, not escalation. Safety. That's why people lean towards the calmest nervous system in the room. They don't always know why, but their bodies know. Because the calmest nervous system signals, I am not overwhelmed. And if he is not overwhelmed, he cannot be controlled. That's the quiet difference. The loud man is broadcasting threat. The regulated man is broadcasting sovereignty. And sovereignty doesn't need reinforcement. It doesn't need escalation. It doesn't need the last word. It doesn't need approval. It operates from internal discipline. That's why sometimes you can stand next to a loud man and feel more powerful without saying anything. Because your body isn't reacting and his is. And at a biological level, the one reacting is losing control. Masculine culture glorifies intensity, but biology rewards regulation. You can see it in boardrooms, you can see it in bars, you can see it in arguments, you can see it in families. The man who refuses to speed up often becomes the center of gravity. Not because he tried to take it, because others gravitate towards stability. And here's the irony. The loudest man in the room often believes he's dominating. But domination isn't determined by decibels. It's determined by who the room orients towards when tension spikes. When voices raise, people instinctively watch who is still, who is breathing, who isn't flinching, because that's who feels anchored. We don't trust inability with power. We don't trust instability with power. Not long term. We might fear it, but we don't trust it. And fear-based dominance eventually collapses. Stability-based authority endures. This is not personality. This is regulation. And regulation is discipline. Not suppression, not numbing, not emotional disconnection. Regulation means activation rises and you don't let it control your behavior. And this is masculine composure. Most men were never taught that. Instead, they were taught, don't back down, stand your ground, be assertive. Don't let anyone disrespect you. Those phrases sound strong, but without regulation, they turn into escalation. And escalation is predictable. Predictability is weak because it's reactive. Power chooses response, not impulse. Here's the question most men never ask themselves. When I raise my voice, am I choosing that, or is it choosing me? Because if your tone rises automatically when challenged, you're not leading, you're reacting. And reaction is surrendered to activation. Hierarchy doesn't go to the biggest voice, it goes to the most disciplined nervous system. And once you understand that, you start seeing rooms differently. You stop measuring power by intensity, you stop measuring it by stability, and that changes how you carry yourself. Not louder, but heavier. Let's say something clearly. Not all loud men are insecure, but insecurity often expresses itself loudly. That difference matters because this isn't an attack, it's a diagnosis. When a man escalates quickly, interrupts constantly, raises volume when challenged, or turns disagreement into confrontation, he's protecting something. And what he's protecting is rarely the argument. He's protecting identity. He's protecting status. He's protecting the fear of looking small. Because for many men, being challenged feels like exposure, and exposure feels like humiliation. So then the nervous system activates. Heat in the chest, jaw tight, voice sharp. And instead of regulating internally, he regulates externally. He pushes outward. He takes more space, more words, more force. And for a moment, it works. People get quiet, the room responds. But here's the catch: compliance is not respect, silence is not authority, and fear never builds trust. The loud man feels powerful because the room pauses. But the pause often isn't admiration, it's discomfort. And discomfort is temporary. The room will always eventually gravitate towards stability because stability feels safe. And here's where controlled compassion enters. Most men were never taught what regulation looks like. They were taught, be strong, stand up for yourself, don't back down, don't be soft, be a man. But no one explained the nervous system. No one taught. If your heart spikes, slow down. If your voice rises, lower it. If someone challenges you, breathe before speaking. So men learned intensity instead of discipline. Intensity feels masculine. Regulation feels vulnerable. Because slowing down in a tense room requires self trust. Escalation requires ego, and ego is easier. The uncomfortable truth is this: it takes more strength to lower your voice than to raise it. It takes more discipline to pause than to interrupt. It takes more self possession to absorb tension than to deflect it. That's why truly regulated men make loud men nervous. Because a man who won't escalate cannot be baited. A man who cannot be baited cannot be controlled. Let's go further. Sometimes loudness is compensation for internal chaos. Sometimes it's overcorrection from childhood shrinking. Sometimes it's insecurity around hierarchy. Sometimes it's fear of being dismissed. Sometimes it's fear of being small. But fear doesn't evaporate because you speak louder. It just gets amplified. And if you need volume to feel respected, your respect is fragile. That's not condemnation, that's clarity. There's another layer. Some men escalate not because they want power, but because chaos makes them anxious. Silence feels unstable, ambiguity feels threatening, disagreement feels like loss of control. So they dominate the space to restore predictability. Volume becomes their grounding mechanism. But grounding that relies on control of others is unstable because others are unpredictable. Self regulation is predictable. That's why discipline builds stability. And here's the hard line: if you cannot sit in a tense room without escalating, you are not dominant, you are dysregulated. That might sting a little, but it's true. Dominance is the ability to remain steady while others escalate. Dominance is choosing tone instead of being chosen by tone. Dominance is discipline over reaction, and discipline is earned, not declared. Let's go backwards. Long before boardrooms, long before bars, long before conference tables, there was a child who learned something quietly: that expression could be corrected, not explosively, quietly, cutting, controlled. And when you're young, quiet correction carries weight. It doesn't feel like rage, it feels like disappointment. It feels like shame. It feels like you're too much, or you shouldn't have said that, or that's not how a man behaves. And when correction isn't loud, when it's measured and cutting, it teaches you something subtle. It teaches you to shrink, not outwardly, inwardly. Your expression softens, your gestures slow, your tone adjusts. You go internal because going internal feels safer than escalation. Some boys respond to correction by getting louder. Some respond by fighting back. Some respond by becoming rigid. And some respond by becoming observant. Controlled, measured, and when shame enters the nervous system early, you learn quickly. If I control myself, no one else controls me. That's not rebellion, that's survival. You learn that composure prevents embarrassment. You learn that regulation prevents exposure. You learn that tone decides consequence, and you become watchful. Expressive children who are corrected early often become composed adults, not because they lost intensity, but because they redirected it inward. Now, here's the part most people miss: that inward regulation becomes a strength, but it also becomes a strategy. When rooms get tense, your body activates. Heart increases, heat in your chest. But instead of escalating, you slow down. Because somewhere in you, that early lesson lives. Control yourself. Stay steady. Don't lose composure, because losing composure means losing autonomy, and autonomy matters. You don't regulate rooms to dominate them. You regulate rooms because chaos threatens stability, and stability protects dignity. You learned young that embarrassment burns, that feeling small is heavy, that being corrected publicly alters your body. So when you enter adult spaces and you feel activation rise, you regulate, because regulation means I decide my tone, I decide my pace, I decide my presence. That's sovereignty. Not loud, not aggressive, but heavy. And here's the mature truth: some loud men were corrected differently. Some were shamed explosively, some were ignored, some were told to man up without being taught how. Some learned that volume brings attention. Some learned that escalation keeps them from feeling small. We all develop strategies. Your strategy was composure. Someone else's strategy was intensity. Neither began as evil. Both began as protection. But only one builds long term authority, because authority comes from stability, not defense. Theory is clean, reality is loud. Let me make this practical, because none of this matters if it doesn't work in volatile rooms. There was a time in a corporate space, 6 of us in the same room, different personalities, different styles. One counterpart in the state was intense, fast talker, rambling, escalatory energy. The kind of man who, when challenged, didn't slow, he accelerated. You've seen it. Volume creeps up, words stack on top of each other, breathing shortens, tone sharpens. Meetings became uncomfortable, not because he was evil, because he was dysregulated. And here's the honest part: internally, I was annoyed. I remember thinking, this is unnecessary. But annoyance is activation too. So instead of reacting, I regulated, breathing slower, standing taller, slowing tempo intentionally, lowering my volume, not to overpower, to stabilize. And something subtle happened. You could watch the room relax. People leaned back, shoulders lowered, eyes shifted. The temperature changed, not because I dominated him, because I refused escalation. Over time, something more interesting happened. He began deferring. Let's ask Chris what he thinks. That wasn't conquest, it was relief, because unstable intensity exhausts even the person performing it. Loud men often feel pressure to sustain momentum, but momentum without regulation burns energy. When someone else steadies the room, they feel release. That's the difference between intimidation and authority. Intimidation forces silence. Authority creates ease. And here's the deeper truth: when he escalated, I didn't feel fear. I felt activation, yes, heart rate up, heat in my chest. But beneath it, there was recognition, chaos. And I've always responded to chaos by slowing down, not to win, but because chaos destabilizes me. Regulating the room regulates myself. That's the honest layer. When I slow down, it's partly for them, but mostly for me. Because loss of control is worse than disagreement. Embarrassment is worse than conflict. Emotional takeover is worse than tension. So I regulate. And once I regulate, the room follows. You see the same thing in bars, different environments, same biology. I remember a bar fight once in college while I was bartending. Energy spikes fast in those environments. Alcohol, ego, crowds, noise. Two men squared up, voices raised, chests out. Everybody in the room activated. And here's what most people do when energy spikes they add to it more yelling, more instructions, more volume. I did the opposite slower movement, firm posture, lower voice, direct eye contact, clear tone, fewer words. You don't calm a volatile room by matching volatility. You absorb it. And when you absorb it, people recalibrate. Because humans unconsciously scan for the calmest energy. They don't consciously say, he's the leader. They feel that's stable. And stability is what tension looks for. Here's the key distinction I didn't escalate to prove dominance, I regulated to prevent chaos. And that's why it works. If I had stepped in to replace loudness with louder loudness, it would have escalated. But calm doesn't escalate chaos, it neutralizes it. Now, here's the layer most men miss. When you regulate a room consistently, something shifts permanently. People orient towards you during tension, even before you speak, because they've learned your nervous system is predictable. And predictability builds trust. And trust builds authority, not fear. Authority rooted in fear collapses when fear disappears. Authority rooted in regulation endures. That's power. Not because it's dramatic, because it's disciplined. So let's finish this honestly. Loudness is easy, escalation is instinctive. Projection requires no discipline, regulation does. And regulation is lonely at first. Because when you stop escalating, you realize how many men rely on it. Escalation bonds insecure men together. Reaction creates quick alliances. Intensity feels like camaraderie. But regulated masculinity often stands alone. Because when you refuse to raise your voice, you remove yourself from the theater. And most culture is theater. Masculine theater, corporate theater, social theater. Who's strongest, who's fastest, who's most assertive, who dominates. But none of those measure sovereignty. Sovereignty is internal. It's the decision that no external stimulus dictates your internal state. Not insult, not tension, not challenge, not disrespect, not noise. And most men have never tasted that freedom because they've never practiced discipline long enough to feel it. Let's strip that down. If someone can bait you into anger, they control you. If someone can raise your volume, they control you. If disagreement changes your posture, your tone, your breathing, you are reacting. And reaction is surrender to environment. You might win the argument, but you've lost autonomy. True dominance is self-governance, and self-governance is quiet. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's not loud. It's stable. And stability doesn't beg for recognition. It just remains. You know what regulated masculinity feels like. It feels like strength without urgency. It feels like presence without performance. It feels like authority without intimidation. It feels like knowing that even if the room burns hot, you remain steady. That's not weakness. That's advanced discipline. And here's the part that may sting. Some men escalate because shrinking once hurt. Some men dominate because being corrected made them feel small. Some men speak louder because silence once felt unsafe. But if you stay trapped in reaction, you're still being governed by that moment. Regulation is what breaks the chain. Regulation says, I feel the activation, I feel the heat, I feel the urge, and I choose otherwise. That choice is power, not the room, not the applause, not the silence you forced, the internal pause. That's where sovereignty lives. Sovereignty lives. I learned early that if I controlled myself, no one else controlled me. That began as protection, but it became freedom. Because once you can regulate your body under pressure, no environment intimidates you. No loud man destabilizes you. No challenge consumes you. You stand, not rigid, not aggressive, just unmoved. And here's the truth most men don't want to hear. The loudest man in the room is rarely the most powerful. The most powerful man is often the quietest one who cannot be baited. And if that challenges something in you, good. Because the goal isn't shame, it's awareness. You don't fix volatility by shaming it. You fix it by building discipline. You don't out loud a loud man. You outregulate him. And the moment you master that, you don't need to perform masculinity anymore. You just embody it. Power isn't loud, it's stable. Secure men don't react, they regulate. I'm Chris Willingham, and this is Without Permission.